The ancient world is filled with things we were never meant to fully understand. Massive stone walls rest deep within jungles, offering no clear explanation for how they were constructed. Fortresses remain hidden beneath lakes, sealed away long after the people who built them vanished. Towns disappear from the historical record without warning. Meanwhile, entire cities emerge that seem to depend on techniques and knowledge we still struggle to explain. In many cases, what remains is not a clear story but scattered evidence. Structures, objects, and locations that raise more questions than answers. Tonight, we are exploring some of those unresolved fragments of the past where archaeology, history, and uncertainty intersect. So, whether you are working in the background, winding down after a long day, or simply looking for something calm to keep you company, we are glad you are here. You do not need to catch every detail. Just let the facts and stories flow however they reach you. As always with our videos, the visuals are here only to provide a bit of context. You do not need to watch to enjoy the journey. So grab a snack, get comfortable, and settle in. Let the noise of the outside world fade for a while and let us begin. At the far edge of the Bolivian Altiplano, rising more than 6,500 meters above sea level, Mount Sajama dominates the surrounding landscape. It is the highest peak in the country, a snow-covered volcano standing above vast windswept plains and thin air, where very few people live today. Yet high on the slopes of Sajama, archaeologists and mountaineers have encountered one of the most remarkable discoveries in the Andes. Naturally preserved mummies placed inside small stone tombs, left undisturbed for centuries in some of the harshest conditions on Earth. The Sajama mummies first drew international attention in 1939, when two Austrian climbers exploring the area noticed unusual stone structures rising high above the plains. These small towers, known locally as chulpas, had openings facing east and contained human remains wrapped carefully in layers of textiles. What shocked the climbers most was the level of preservation. Despite exposure to thin air and freezing temperatures, the bodies remained intact, with skin, hair, and clothing astonishingly well preserved. News of the discovery spread quickly, and soon archaeologists began to investigate the site. Chulpas themselves are not unique to Sajama. Across the Andes, especially in Peru and Bolivia, similar above-ground tombs were constructed by pre-Inca cultures to house the remains of elites. These structures were often built from stone or adobe and designed with openings that allowed sunlight to enter. What makes the Sajama chulpas distinctive, however, is their altitude. Some are positioned at elevations above 5,000 meters, higher than many villages in the Himalayas. At these extreme heights, the environment becomes a powerful agent of preservation. The intense cold, dry winds and low oxygen levels created a natural freeze-drying process, turning the interred bodies into mummies without any deliberate embalming. Radiocarbon dating of remains from Sajama indicates they were placed in the chulpas around 1,000 years ago, during the late pre-Columbian period. They are likely associated with Aymara-speaking groups that dominated much of the central Andes before the rise of the Inca Empire. The mummies include both adults and children, wrapped in layers of finely woven textiles. Some still wear tunics, belts, and sandals. The preservation is so striking that even facial expressions can still be distinguished. Life on Sajama is brutal for the living, but ideal for preservation. Daytime sunlight can briefly warm the surface, yet nights plunge far below freezing. This constant cycle of cold and dryness prevents bacteria from breaking down organic material. As a result, textiles, feathers, and hair can survive for centuries, allowing researchers to study not only the people themselves, but also their clothing and burial customs in extraordinary detail. What makes the Sajama mummies particularly fascinating is how little they were disturbed over long periods of time. Unlike the better-known Inca mummies of Peru, often discovered in sacrificial contexts on remote mountaintops, the Sajama chulpas appear to have served as community tombs revisited repeatedly. Families or social groups may have added bodies across generations, creating clusters of tombs scattered across the high slopes. Archaeologists believe these sites represent a tradition of ancestor veneration common throughout the Andes, where the dead were not considered gone, but remained active members of society who could influence the living. The discoveries also provide valuable insight into pre-Inca cultures in Bolivia. Long before the Inca rose to power in Cusco, the Altiplano supported complex societies such as the Tiwanaku and later regional polities. These groups built cities, developed raised field agriculture to cultivate quinoa and potatoes, and herded llamas and alpacas across the high plateau. By the time the Sahama mummies were interred, the Inca were expanding into the region and would eventually incorporate it into their empire. The tombs suggest that despite political change, local traditions of burial and ancestor worship continued. The clothing found with the Sahama mummies tells its own story. Textiles include tunics made from llama or alpaca wool, dyed using natural pigments arranged in geometric patterns. Some garments are so well preserved that weaving techniques can be examined thread by thread. These fabrics were far more than simple clothing. They represented identity, community belonging, and social status. In Andean societies, textiles were among the most valuable possessions, frequently used as offerings and symbols of wealth. The placement of the chulpas may also have carried deep symbolic meaning. High places in the Andes were considered sacred, believed to be inhabited by powerful mountain spirits known as apis. By placing their dead on the slopes of Sahama, communities may have sought to connect their ancestors with these spiritual forces, ensuring protection and balance for the living. Orienting the tombs toward the rising sun in the east reflected a broader Andean worldview that linked life, death, and natural cycles. Although the Sahama mummies became known during the 20th century, they have not been studied as extensively as other Andean mummy discoveries. Their remote location is a major reason. The area is difficult to access, with thin air that challenges even experienced climbers. Expeditions during the 1970s and later documented dozens of chulpas, but many remain unexplored. Looting has also posed a serious problem, as both local residents and outsiders disturbed some tombs in search of textiles or artifacts. Still, enough remains to offer a rare glimpse into this high-altitude mortuary tradition. The natural preservation scene at Sahama also highlights the unique role of the Andes in world archaeology. Very few environments produce mummies on such a scale without intentional embalming. While ancient Egypt perfected artificial mummification, Andean cultures relied on climate alone. In dry coastal deserts, caves, and high mountains, bodies resisted decay naturally. The Sahama mummies are part of this broader Andean phenomenon, yet they stand among the highest altitude examples ever discovered. For archaeologists, these remains offer far more than striking visuals. They provide data on diet, health, and everyday life. Analysis of hair samples reveals evidence of maize and other Andean staples, while textile studies uncover trade networks for dyes and fibers. Even parasites preserved within some mummies tell stories about health challenges faced by people in the pre-Columbian Andes. Despite their importance, the Sahama mummies exist in a fragile condition. Exposure to modern air and handling can cause textiles to deteriorate rapidly, and many tombs have already suffered damage. Preservation efforts have been limited, and much of our knowledge comes from photographs and reports made decades ago. The remoteness of Sahama has helped protect the site, but it also makes systematic research difficult. One mystery remains unresolved: why these tombs were eventually abandoned and never reused. After the Inca conquest and later the arrival of the Spanish, burial practices changed, and many high-altitude traditions faded. The Sahama chulpas remain frozen witnesses to a different era, when communities endured extreme cold and thin air to honor their ancestors on the slopes of a sacred mountain. Now, our next mystery takes us to the Nile Valley, where an ancient skeleton presents a very different puzzle about humanity's deep past. In 1980, Egyptian archaeologists working at a quarry site near Sohag in Upper Egypt made an extraordinary discovery. Buried beneath layers of sediment lay a nearly complete human skeleton, accompanied by a collection of stone tools and the remains of a simple grave. The site became known as Nazlet Khater, and radiocarbon dating later placed it between 35,000 and 40,000 years old. What made the find remarkable was that this skeleton, known as Nazlet Khater II, was among the oldest modern human burials ever discovered in Africa. Yet it did not appear entirely modern. The Nazlit-Khater individual was an adult male, likely in his 20s, buried in a shallow pit with a finely made stone axe placed beside him. His bones showed clear signs of deliberate burial rather than accidental deposition. That single detail, intentional interment, places the site among the earliest known examples of ritual treatment of the dead in Africa. But what truly captured researchers' attention were the physical characteristics of the skeleton itself. While the skull and facial proportions were broadly Homo sapiens, certain traits appeared more archaic. The form of the cranium and the jaw suggested affinities with earlier species such as Homo erectus or archaic Homo sapiens. In this sense, Nazlit-Khater too represents a transitional figure, an early modern human who still retained features from older lineages. The discovery offered rare physical evidence of what populations in North Africa looked like during the late Pleistocene, a period when modern humans were expanding outward from Africa into Eurasia. The tools found alongside the skeleton added further intrigue. The stone axe, made from chert, was carefully flaked, revealing planning and technical skill in its manufacture. Additional artifacts nearby indicated that Nazlit-Khater functioned not only as a burial site but also as a quarry and workshop. People extracted chert nodules from the surrounding rock and shaped them into tools on location. The inclusion of these implements in the grave suggests they carried symbolic or personal meaning, rather than serving purely practical purposes. Archaeologists believe the people who buried this man belonged to a hunter-gatherer group living along the Nile corridor during a time when the environment looked very different from today. Around 35,000 years ago, the region experienced wetter conditions than the later desert landscapes of the Sahara. Rivers, lakes, and grasslands supported wildlife such as gazelle, hippos, and fish. These early inhabitants of Egypt would have hunted and foraged across a landscape far greener and more forgiving than the arid desert that surrounds Nazlit-Khater today. The preservation of the skeleton was exceptional. The bones were found in anatomical order, indicating that the body decomposed in place without disturbance. The burial position was extended on the back, resembling burial practices seen thousands of years later in human history. This suggests that even at this early stage, humans had already developed structured ideas about death, ceremony, and respect for the deceased. One of the most intriguing aspects of the discovery emerged from the study of injuries visible on the bones. The Nazlit-Khater man displayed severe tooth wear and signs of repetitive stress injuries in his arms and shoulders. These marks are consistent with heavy manual labor. The leading interpretation is that he was involved in quarrying and stone tool production, physically demanding work that placed repeated strain on the body. His teeth also bore grooves likely caused by holding plant fibers or leather strips in his mouth, a behavior observed in toolmakers who used their teeth as a third hand during work. For anthropologists, Nazlit-Khater helped bridge a critical gap in the fossil record between early Homo sapiens populations of East Africa and the later Upper Paleolithic peoples of Europe and Western Asia. It demonstrated that anatomically modern humans were firmly established in North Africa by at least 40,000 years ago and that this region played a significant role in human migration and cultural development. What makes the discovery even more important is its rarity. Human remains from this period in Africa are extremely scarce. Environmental conditions tend to destroy organic material over tens of thousands of years. As a result, a well-preserved skeleton from this era provides a snapshot that few other sites can offer. The Nazlit-Khater burial has been studied for decades, with researchers applying newer technologies such as CT scanning and three-dimensional reconstruction to refine understanding of the individual's anatomy. The surrounding site adds another layer of significance. Nazlit-Khater is not simply a burial location. It forms part of a larger complex of prehistoric quarries. Archaeologists have identified multiple extraction pits and tool-making areas, indicating sustained and repeated occupation. This was a place communities likely returned to over long periods, perhaps thousands of years, to mine stone for tools. The discovery connects Egypt's deep prehistory directly to its later emergence as a center of civilization. Long before the first pharaohs, humans were already shaping the landscape through purposeful labor and technological skill. Environmental evidence from the region suggests that during this time, the Nile acted as a refuge for populations displaced by shifting climates. The desert surrounding it expanded and contracted cyclically, pushing humans and animals into narrower bands of fertile land. These environmental pressures likely encouraged innovation and social organization, conditions that would later support more permanent settlement patterns thousands of years afterward. Nazlik-Keter demonstrates that humans were already adapting successfully to these challenges long before written history began. The skeleton also raises broader questions about early human diversity. Genetic and fossil evidence now shows that African populations during this period were not uniform. Different groups carried varying combinations of traits, reflecting deep ancestral roots and interaction with neighboring populations. Nazlik-Keter's mixture of modern and archaic features fits this pattern precisely. Rather than a simple linear march toward modernity, human evolution was regional and complex, with overlapping populations interacting across Africa and beyond. The desert preserved this single life with extraordinary care. Yet Egypt still holds many more secrets buried beneath its sands, waiting to be uncovered. The next of these mysteries takes us deeper into the shadows of early civilization, where a fire in a sacred temple would alter fate of one of history's greatest cities. Across the deserts of what now modern Jordan,